True power never announces itself. It doesn't shout, posture, or beg for attention. It doesn't need to. Real power moves quietly. It enters a room without saying a word and somehow changes the temperature. In a world addicted to noise, outrage, and constant performance, the most dangerous person is rarely the loudest one. It's the calm one, the unreadable one. The person who doesn't rush to explain, defend, or react. That is the core of Machiavellian wisdom. Most people misunderstand power. They think it looks like aggression, dominance, or force. They think strength is loud. But violence is loud. Intelligence is silent. While others explode emotionally, chase validation, or try to prove themselves through spectacle, the strategist does something far more effective. He watches. He listens. He measures. And when he finally moves, it isn't to be seen. It's to end the game before anyone realizes it started. The ones who yell often reveal their fear. The ones who threaten expose their insecurity. But the person who stays emotionally neutral, whose presence alone shifts the mood of a room, holds the real leverage. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He knew brute force might win a moment, but psychological control wins wars. Fear fades. Presence lingers. When you no longer feel the need to prove yourself, everything about how you move changes. You stop reacting to insults because silence makes them louder than any comeback ever could. You don't declare war. You let the other side unravel on its own, filling the empty space with their own paranoia. They imagine what you might do, and imagination is always more terrifying than reality. This type of power is never built in the spotlight. It's built in restraint, in self-control, in patience, in the ability to see 10 moves ahead while everyone else is still trapped in reaction mode. Real strength is not about dominating others emotionally. It's about maintaining inner stability while chaos is unfolding around you. It's about understanding that the most powerful energy isn't the one that burns hot and fast. It's the cold, steady force that outlasts everything else. To operate at this level, you don't become cruel or detached from reality. You become disciplined. You refuse to let emotion hijack your decisions. You learn to carry silence like a blade. Calm becomes unsettling to people who confuse stillness with weakness. Your lack of reaction forces others to project, overthink, and expose themselves. And that's the paradox most people miss. The most powerful presence in the room isn't the one talking. It's the one everyone keeps watching, wondering what they're thinking. That's not intimidation through force. That's domination through mastery. Once you adopt this mindset, you stop fighting to be respected. You stop chasing validation. You simply become someone people hesitate to test. Because in any conflict, truth is secondary. Perception is everything. The battlefield doesn't begin with fists, weapons, or arguments. It begins with optics, with the story being told, with the image being projected, with the narrative people choose to believe. Machiavelli was brutally honest about this. People don't act on facts, they act on appearances. He wrote that men judge far more with their eyes than with their hands. Everyone can see you, but very few will ever truly understand you. That insight alone explains most conflicts in business, politics, and personal life. That's why the first rule in any confrontation is simple. Control the optics, and you control the outcome. When you appear calm, grounded, and unshaken, even while struggling internally, others hesitate. And hesitation is everything. It creates space. It disrupts momentum. It opens doors you can walk through later. It doesn't matter who's right. It doesn't matter who's stronger. What matters is who looks like they're in control. This is where Machiavellians separate themselves from emotional thinkers. They perform under pressure. They remain still, while others panic. They don't interrupt. They let the other person talk. They listen carefully. And then, when the time is right, they use the other person's own words as leverage. Optics aren't superficial. They're strategic. In business, politics, and even everyday relationships, the most composed person often wins by default. If you appear reactive, unstable, or emotionally charged, even the truth won't save you. But if you appear focused, detached, and poised, even uncertainty bends in your favor. This isn't manipulation for cruelty's sake. It's strategic positioning in a world that consistently rewards illusion over substance. You don't need to overpower your opponent. You only need to appear untouchable. Let them argue while you stay silent. Let them explain while you observe. Let them grow emotional in your presence while you respond with stillness. In a world where very few people can master themselves, those who do appear almost godlike. Because when you control how you are seen, you control how you are treated. And in confrontation, that is more powerful than any weapon. Now here's where most people make a critical mistake. They believe confrontation is about attacking the person directly, challenging them head-on, exposing them publicly, forcing change through pressure. But direct confrontation only fuels resistance. It raises defenses. It exposes your own vulnerabilities. The true strategist plays a different game. Instead of trying to change who someone is, they change the environment around them. They shift the conditions. They reshape the context until the other person's next move becomes predictable, almost inevitable. This is the essence of environmental manipulation. You don't fight human nature. You work around it. Think of it like chess. You don't always need to remove a piece to win. Sometimes you close off escape routes. You reposition threats. You change the layout of the board so that every option your opponent has leads to disadvantage. Deadlines move. Resources dry up. Alliances weaken. None of it looks like an attack. And that's the point. In negotiations, in politics, in personal power struggles, victory rarely comes from brute force. It comes from controlling the conditions under which decisions are made. When you control time, space, and pressure, you don't need to argue. You let circumstances do the work for you. Rescheduling meetings, altering priorities, isolating support systems. These small shifts disrupt rhythm. They drain energy. They exhaust opponents before they even realize what's happening. When you reframe the scenario, you force adaptation, and forced adaptation leads to mistakes. By focusing on the external, tangible elements of conflict rather than the emotional chaos inside someone's head, you create a controlled battlefield, one where your pace dictates the outcome. This isn't passive. It's proactive construction. You're not defending. You're building an arena where your opponent has no winning move. And success here isn't measured by loud victories. It's measured by how thoroughly the environment itself bends in your favor. Sometimes, the most lethal move is to appear harmless. In a world obsessed with visible power, the greatest threat is often the one no one sees coming. Machiavelli understood that the predator who roars too early invites caution, but the one who limps, apologizes, or plays the fool disarms the room. That's when the trap is set. To feign weakness is not to be weak. It's to master misdirection. It's to let others underestimate you, expose their strategies, relax their defenses, and grow arrogant while you prepare quietly. This isn't cowardice. It's calculated warfare. Precision always outlasts brute force. And as Machiavelli wrote, a ruler must learn to be both the lion and the fox, strong enough to destroy, clever enough to deceive. When you retreat, apologize, or submit, Do it without surrendering intention. Let them believe they've won. Let their guard drop. Let arrogance blind them. Because arrogance creates carelessness, and carelessness creates openings. Your power grows not in retaliation, but in restraint. You're not retreating. You're resetting the stage. And when the moment comes, you won't need noise, rage, or spectacle. You'll need timing. The real masters of confrontation never win through emotional explosions. They win through timing. Silent timing. The moment of greatest power almost never comes when people expect it. It comes when your opponent believes you are weak, distracted, disarmed, or finished. When they relax. When they stop watching closely. That's when control quietly shifts. When you strike from emotion, you reveal your hand. When you strike from patience, you end the game. This is why Machiavellian strategy favors restraint over reaction. You don't lash out when provoked. You don't rush to defend your name. You don't respond just because silence feels uncomfortable. You let discomfort work for you. You let it create uncertainty. And uncertainty is a far sharper weapon than aggression. To feign weakness is to weaponize humility. It's not about pretending to be incapable. It's about staying underestimated long enough to control both timing and outcome. When someone believes they've already won, they stop protecting themselves. They expose habits, intentions, alliances. They speak too freely. They move too loosely. And every one of those moments becomes leverage. You don't defeat your enemy by overpowering them. You let them walk themselves into defeat. But here's where discipline matters. If you must confront, you finish it. Half measures are not mercy. They are invitations for retaliation. A wounded opponent is far more dangerous than a defeated one. Pain breeds obsession. Obsession breeds revenge. Machiavelli warned clearly about this. If you allow an adversary to walk away with dignity, influence, or leverage, they will return. Stronger, smarter, and fueled by resentment. The goal of confrontation is not expression. It's closure. And closure doesn't always mean physical destruction. Most of the time, it's psychological finality. It's cutting off access, silencing influence, removing leverage, making it impossible for the conflict to be resurrected later. In personal situations, that might mean blocking, ghosting, or cutting ties without explanation. In business or politics, it can mean removing not just the opponent, but their support system, resources, and narrative. You don't punish, you prevent recurrence, because unfinished conflict doesn't fade, it ferments. Power requires decisiveness. When you hesitate, others plan. When you show mercy, they take notes. When you settle for compromise out of fear, they gather strength quietly. But when you act with finality, without drama or emotion, you send one unmistakable message. There will be no second round. Let the silence after your move do the talking. Let the uncertainty haunt them. Make the example clean, sharp, and irreversible enough that no one else is tempted to test you. The best confrontation is the one that never has to be repeated. This isn't about ego. It's about protecting your peace. It's about never having to look over your shoulder. The untouchable don't leave doors open behind them. They don't explain their exits. They act once, with precision, and never return to the battlefield. Because they understand something most people don't. True victory doesn't come from defeating the enemy. It comes from erasing the possibility of their return. Fear doesn't come from threats. It comes from reflection. Machiavelli understood that the most effective way to control an enemy is not by attacking them directly, but by letting them confront themselves. Instead of shouting, accusing, or escalating, you hold up a mirror. You remain silent, And in that silence, they begin to project their own fears, guilt, and instability. People fear uncertainty more than confrontation. When you don't respond, they fill the gaps themselves. When you don't deny rumors, they assume there's truth behind them. When you refuse to clarify your intentions, imagination takes over, and imagination is ruthless. When you let others wonder what you might do, not what you will do, possibility becomes the weapon. Ambiguity creates psychological pressure far stronger than any direct threat. Let your silence be louder than their accusations. Let them overthink every quiet moment. Allow their mind to work against them long before you ever move. Machiavelli didn't say you must be feared. He implied something more powerful. Let others believe you might be capable of things they wouldn't dare test. That belief alone keeps people in line. This is the brilliance of the psychological mirror. It doesn't reflect who you actually are. It reflects what they project onto you. And what they project often reveals their own darkness, their fear, their instability. In a world addicted to reaction, stillness becomes disturbing. Unpredictability becomes leverage. The person who cannot be read is far more dangerous than the one who shouts. You don't need to terrify people directly. You only need to let them terrify themselves. Because fear that comes from within has no escape. This is how real power operates. Not through force, through invisibility. You haunt without chasing. You unsettle without speaking. You allow the mind, left alone with silence, to become its own executioner. That's how the untouchable win. Not through destruction, but through suggestion and the fear it leaves behind. In an age of instant gratification, patience has become a superpower. Machiavelli understood that time is not something to rush or fear. It's a weapon to be sharpened. The wise don't rush into conflict. They wait. They watch. They calculate. Because time, when used deliberately, accomplishes what no blade ever could. It wears down resistance. It isolates targets. It exposes weaknesses. Most people want results now. Revenge now. Control now. But urgency is the enemy of precision. When you act impulsively, you step into their rhythm, their timing, their trap. When you slow things down, you seize control of the pace. Let them throw fire. You throw silence. Let them provoke. You delay. Let them assume victory. You wait. While they burn energy trying to pull a reaction from you, you're tightening the noose around their own mistakes. The enemy who believes you are weak because you are silent becomes arrogant, and arrogance always blinds. Patience is not passivity. It is deliberate power. It means you've mastered yourself before attempting to master anyone else. It means you're willing to sacrifice the satisfaction of striking first for the certainty of striking last and striking right. Machiavelli rarely moved quickly. He let paranoia, ego, and miscalculation destroy his enemies from the inside. Then, once they were isolated and exhausted, he moved cleanly, without emotion, without noise. That's how time wins battles most people never even realize have begun. When you learn to move slower than the world, you start to see more than the world. And in the space between reaction and response, you gain the edge. Because the person who can delay gratification, delay conflict, and delay speech is the person who survives long enough to dominate. Not with fire, with patience that cuts deeper than any blade. And that brings us to one of Machiavelli's most overlooked principles. A lone enemy is a weak enemy. Before any strike, you isolate the target. Because the real danger isn't the individual. It's their network, their allies, their influence, their momentum. As long as they're surrounded, they feel bold, protected, dangerous. But once they stand alone, Even the strongest begin to hesitate. Isolation is not just a tactic. It's the foundation of a flawless move. You don't weaken your enemy by attacking them directly. You weaken them by quietly removing their structure. You introduce doubt into their relationships. You create tension in their alliances. You plant questions that fester in private conversations. And slowly, support disappears. Confidence wavers. Momentum stalls. Silence grows. The moment your target starts asking, "Why is no one standing with me?" you've already won half the war. They feel exposed, unstable, vulnerable. That's when precision matters. Not revenge, not humiliation. Precision. In psychological warfare, isolation is the scalpel that cuts deeper than confrontation ever could. You don't need to destroy their name. You dissolve their influence. You don't dismantle the person. You pull the thread until the structure collapses. And when the dust settles, no one remembers the fight. They only remember that someone disappeared from the board. That disappearance is the signature of true power. No spectacle, no public victory lap, no explanation, just absence. And absence, when engineered correctly, is louder than any confrontation. When someone vanishes without a fight, without allies stepping in, without a narrative to defend them, the message is clear. Resistance was never an option. This is how power is exercised without becoming messy. Most people think dominance means destruction, raising your voice, exposing flaws, crushing someone publicly. But Machiavellian strategy understands something deeper. You don't need to destroy a person to neutralize them. You only need to remove their ability to matter. Influence is the real currency. Strip that away, and the person collapses on their own. You don't attack the name. You dismantle the network. You don't confront the person. You pull the support structure until it gives way. And when it does, the fall looks natural, almost inevitable. This is why confrontation in a crowd creates chaos. Too many variables, too many eyes, too much emotion. But confrontation paired with silence creates control. Silence denies oxygen. It denies reaction. It denies escalation. Let others call it cold. Let them call it ruthless. What you're doing is maintaining order. You're preventing instability from spreading. You're choosing precision over emotional mess. Power, at its highest level, is invisible. And this brings us to a fundamental misunderstanding most people have about Machiavelli. They think his ideas are about cruelty, about domination for ego, about winning at all costs. But at the core, Machiavellian strategy is about positioning, about survival, about minimizing risk while maximizing control. You don't need to respond to every insult. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to explain yourself to people who've already decided how they see you. What you need is mastery over yourself. Because the moment your emotions become visible, they become usable. Against you. This is where most people lose power without realizing it. They argue when ignored. They react when provoked. They overshare when uncomfortable. Every one of those reactions hands control to someone else. Silence denies access. When you observe without reacting, you gather information. When you delay response, you shift pressure. When you strike only when the moment guarantees impact, you reduce risk to almost zero. This applies everywhere. Toxic relationships, workplace politics, social hierarchies, betrayal. Power struggles rarely end because someone was louder or more aggressive. They end because one side stopped playing emotionally and started thinking strategically. Patience becomes protection. Silence becomes leverage. Don't let your emotions become someone else's weapon. Learn to isolate problems instead of attacking people. Learn to control how you're perceived instead of trying to control outcomes directly. And never confront from a position of weakness, fatigue, or emotional charge. Let time do what force never could. In a world addicted to impulse, your calm becomes disruptive. While others rush to react, you wait. While others chase closure, you deny it. While others seek validation, you remain grounded. The more unpredictable and composed you become, the more untouchable you are. This isn't just strategy, it's survival. Now, there's another layer to this that most discussions never touch. Power doesn't only come from what you do, it comes from what people believe you might do. That ambiguity creates hesitation, and hesitation creates advantage. You don't need to clarify your limits. You don't need to explain your ethics. You don't need to announce your boundaries. Let people wonder. Uncertainty forces caution. When people can't read you, they project. They assume worst-case scenarios. They hold back. They second-guess themselves. And while they're busy calculating imaginary risks, you move freely. This is why unpredictability, when paired with emotional control, is so powerful. Predictable aggression is easy to counter. Predictable kindness is easy to exploit. But controlled unpredictability creates psychological pressure without effort. People become careful around you without knowing why. And that's the goal. Not fear in the dramatic sense, but respect rooted in uncertainty. The understanding that testing you carries unknown consequences. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He didn't rely on constant enforcement. He relied on reputation, perception, and the strategic use of restraint. He let stories spread, let silence linger, let others fill in the blanks. When you constantly explain yourself, you reduce mystery. When you constantly react, you reveal patterns. When you constantly defend, you validate attacks. Silence interrupts all of that. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable but necessary. There are moments when restraint is no longer enough. When silence alone won't close the loop. When a move must be made. And when that moment comes, it must be final. The worst mistake you can make is striking halfway. Applying pressure without resolution. Calling someone out without removing their ability to respond later. That creates resentment without closure, and resentment is fuel. Machiavelli warned against this repeatedly. If you harm someone, you must do it in a way that leaves them unable to retaliate. Not physically, necessarily, but structurally, psychologically, strategically. That might mean removing access completely, ending communication permanently, destroying leverage quietly. In modern life, this doesn't look dramatic. It looks like clean exits, closed doors, disappearing access, no explanations, no emotional closure conversations, no reopening of wounds. You don't announce the end, you enforce it. Because power isn't about winning arguments, it's about preventing future threats. The goal is not to hurt, it's to neutralize. Unfinished conflicts always return. They linger in memory, in ego, in resentment. Finished conflicts dissolve. They leave nothing to rebuild from. And this requires decisiveness. When you hesitate, others plan. When you show mercy without control, others adapt. When you leave doors open, others wait for opportunity. But when you act once, cleanly, without emotion, you close the chapter permanently. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you responsible. Responsible for your peace. Responsible for your stability. Responsible for your future. The untouchable understand this instinctively. They don't linger in old battles. They don't revisit resolved conflicts. They don't look back to check reactions. They move forward and never return to the same battlefield twice. Because revisiting old conflicts reopens old power dynamics. And power, once reclaimed, must be protected. Now here's the final layer most people never master. Power is not maintained through constant action. It's maintained through consistency of behavior. When people learn that you don't react impulsively, don't engage emotionally, and don't tolerate repeated violations, they adjust automatically. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to warn. Your pattern teaches them. One clean boundary enforced once is worth 1,000 emotional explanations. One decisive move is worth endless arguments. This is how reputation is built. Quietly. Over time. Through consistency. And once your reputation is established, most battles end before they begin. People choose easier targets. They redirect aggression elsewhere. They stop testing. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're precise. This is the essence of Machiavellian dominance. Not chaos, not cruelty, not constant conflict, but positioning so solid that conflict becomes unnecessary. Power, at its highest level, is preventative. And when you reach that level, you stop thinking in terms of winning fights. You start thinking in terms of eliminating the need for them altogether. That's when the game truly shifts. Once you understand that power is preventative, not reactive, your entire approach to conflict changes. You stop seeing confrontation as something to win and start seeing it as something to avoid by design. The highest level of dominance is not defeating an enemy. It's structuring your life, your environment, and your presence so enemies rarely form in the first place. This is where most people fail. They think power is something you turn on when problems appear. But true power is something you build long before conflict ever shows up. It's embedded in how you speak, how you pause, how you move, and, most importantly, how you don't move. People test boundaries instinctively. They push where they sense weakness, hesitation, or emotional leakage. But when your behavior is consistent, controlled, and deliberate, those tests stop happening. Not because you explained yourself, but because your pattern made the outcome obvious. This is why the untouchable rarely look busy fighting. They look calm, grounded, slightly detached. And that detachment isn't apathy. It's clarity. They don't rush to correct disrespect. They don't scramble to fix misunderstandings. They don't chase closure. They let time and silence sort people into categories naturally. Allies stay close. Opportunists drift away. Enemies expose themselves without being provoked. And this brings us to a crucial insight. Most conflicts reveal more about the person initiating them than the person receiving them. Emotional outbursts, passive aggression, gossip, and provocation are signals of insecurity. When you don't react, those signals amplify. The other person begins to look unstable while you remain composed. That contrast is power. You don't need to attack. You let imbalance reveal itself. You let others disqualify themselves. This is why silence is so effective. It forces people to confront their own behavior without interference. Most people cannot tolerate that. They want reaction. They want reassurance. They want resistance. When they don't get it, they spiral. They over-explain. They escalate. They contradict themselves. And every move they make hands you more information. Information is leverage. While they're busy burning energy trying to provoke you, you're learning exactly where they're fragile, what they fear, what they need, what they can't control. And once you see that clearly, you no longer need to rush. This is why emotional discipline is the foundation of Machiavellian strategy. Without it, everything else collapses. You cannot control optics if your emotions leak through your behavior. You cannot manipulate environment if you're reacting impulsively. You cannot isolate targets if you're visibly invested in the outcome. Detachment creates clarity. Clarity creates control. Now let's talk about the role of restraint in long-term dominance. Restraint is often mistaken for weakness because it doesn't satisfy ego. It doesn't feel like action. It feels like waiting. And waiting is uncomfortable for people who crave immediate validation. But restraint is not inactivity. It is stored power. Every time you choose not to react, you conserve energy. Every time you delay confrontation, you gather data. Every time you remain silent under pressure, you force others to reveal themselves. Over time, this compounds. People begin to associate you with stability, with unpredictability, with consequence. Not because you threaten, but because you don't explain. They don't know where the line is, only that crossing it once had permanent effects. That uncertainty changes behavior. This is how authority forms without titles, how influence grows without force, how control emerges without confrontation. And it's also why Machiavellian power is misunderstood by those who live emotionally. Emotional people equate expression with strength. Strategic people understand that expression is often a liability. Every word you say can be used. Every reaction can be studied. Every emotional spike can be exploited. Silence closes those doors. Now, restraint does not mean avoidance forever. There are moments when movement is required. But the difference is that when you move, it's not reactive. It's deliberate. It's precise. And it's backed by preparation. When you finally act, it feels sudden to everyone else. Not because it was impulsive, but because they weren't paying attention. They mistook your stillness for inaction. And that mistake is costly. This is where timing becomes everything. Machiavellian timing is not about speed. It's about alignment. Acting when conditions are optimal. When resistance is minimal. When retaliation is impossible. When perception is already leaning in your favor. You don't act when emotions are high. You act when attention is elsewhere. You act when momentum has already shifted. By the time your move is noticed, it's already irreversible. This is why clean exits are so powerful. When you remove yourself without explanation, you deny the other person resolution. They don't get closure. They don't get feedback. They don't get to rewrite the story. That lack of resolution creates psychological imbalance, and imbalance favors the one who left calmly. The mistake most people make is announcing their departure, explaining their reasons, seeking validation. That turns the exit into a negotiation. It reopens influence. The Machiavellian exit is silent, final, and unremarkable on the surface. But its impact lingers far longer than dramatic confrontation ever could, because what people can't understand, they obsess over. This is also why the untouchable are rarely dragged into prolonged conflict. They don't feed it. They don't argue narratives. They don't defend reputations loudly. They let time and consistency do the work. False stories collapse without reinforcement. Provocations die without reaction. Enemies lose momentum without engagement. But this only works if your behavior remains consistent. One emotional slip can undo months of restraint. One impulsive reaction can expose patterns you've carefully hidden. This is why self-mastery is non-negotiable. Machiavellian strategy doesn't start with others. It starts with you. Your impulses. Your need to be seen. Your need to be understood. Your need to win emotionally. Every need is a vulnerability. The less you need from others, the more leverage you hold. When approval is optional, Manipulation loses power. When validation is unnecessary, provocation fails. When ego is under control, strategy becomes effortless. This is what people mean when they say the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't need anything from it. Now let's address a dangerous misconception. Silence does not mean inaction forever. Patience does not mean tolerance. Emotional control does not mean allowing repeated violations. There is a line, but you don't advertise it. When the line is crossed, the response is not emotional. It is structural. Access is removed. Privileges disappear. Opportunities close. Influence evaporates. And it happens quietly. No warning speech. No dramatic explanation. No emotional release. Just consequence. And because there was no visible build-up, the outcome feels sudden and absolute. That's what gives it weight. People remember that. This is how reputation is built without force. Others learn by observation. They see what happens to those who miscalculate. They adjust behavior accordingly. You don't need to threaten everyone. One example is enough. This is why Machiavelli emphasized decisiveness, not cruelty. Decisiveness. When you act, act fully. When you disengage, disengage completely. When you remove someone, remove the possibility of return. Half measures create enemies. Clean decisions create distance. And distance is safety. As you move through life with this mindset, you'll notice something interesting. The less you seek control, the more control you gain. The less you chase dominance, the more dominant your presence becomes. Because people sense stability. They sense emotional gravity. They sense when someone cannot be easily provoked or manipulated. And they respect it, even if they don't like it. That's the trade-off. Machiavellian power is not about being liked. It's about being effective. It's about reducing risk, conserving energy, and protecting peace. In a world driven by impulse, reaction, and emotional exhibition, the calm strategist stands apart. Not louder, not faster, but more precise, and precision always wins in the long run. At the highest level, Machiavellian power no longer looks like strategy. It feels inevitable. You are no longer reacting to conflict. You are shaping behavior before conflict ever forms. Problems fade, not because you confront them, but because engaging with you feels uncertain, costly, and unrewarding. This is where most people never arrive. You stop thinking in terms of enemies and start thinking in terms of access. Who has it? Who earns it? And who loses it quietly? Power is no longer enforced through constant action, but through consistency. Once people realize your boundaries are real and irreversible, they adjust on their own. Silence becomes your default. You speak only when it matters. You act only when timing favors you. And when something threatens your peace or position, you withdraw cleanly, no explanations, no emotional closure. You no longer try to win arguments, correct perceptions, or prove strength. You let others underestimate you, knowing that power that must be displayed is already leaking. When conflict appears, it ends through removal of access, not escalation. Attention fuels conflict. When you withdraw it completely, the game ends. In a world addicted to noise and reaction, your calm becomes dominance.